Hello everybody, and welcome to the developer commentary for Defending the Mall. This video is going to be more structured than the developer commentary streams PuffballsUnited did for the official games, both because I have that much to organize and because I want this video to have a little more substance than just pointing out little bits of trivia with each and every fail. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily, I just think I'll leave the reference hunting up to those who want to dig deeper. And with that out of the way, let's take a look at how Defending the Mall came to be. For those of you who haven't been following my work for very long, it may come as a shock to you that Defending the Mall is actually my fourth, technically fifth, Henry Stickmin Fangame. I first discovered the Henry Stickmin series in 2019 through Fleeing the Complex, and being an avid Scratch game developer in middle school, I wanted to try to recreate my own version of it. So I got to work, and after about 2 to 3 weeks, I had finished my first ever Henry Stickmin Fangame, Nutcrackers, a game that didn't even feature any of the Henry characters. This game was composed of poorly drawn art and images just stolen from Google, but this was the origin of my career in the fangame scene. Nutcrackers got a sequel in 2020, and then I made Retaking the Airship over the span of 8th and 9th grade, with the game dropping in August of 2022. The reason why this fangame is more relevant to our story today than the other ones is because I spent well over a year working on it, but I set a release date way too soon and ended up rushing the game, and it had a very rough launch because of that. I experienced pretty bad burnout, and to this day, whenever I look back at Retaking the Airship, there's just always some level of regret on my mind. So fast forward to August of 2023, and I was thinking about the game again. Despite having made 3 fangames at this point, I was disappointed in myself because I didn't feel like any of them had really matched the quality threshold I knew I could hold myself to. I also felt bad because up until this point, my fangames are some of the longer ones out there, and I wasn't happy knowing that. There had never been a particularly high number of good Henry Stickmin fangames that were longer than a couple of option screens at this point, and I just felt like I needed some redemption. To prove not only to myself that I can make a competent fangame, but to also give the fangame scene a great fangame to chew on and hopefully in turn inspire the creation of even more fangames. So naturally, I began work on a project you're all now very familiar with. A remake of Retaking the Airship. Yeah, you weren't expecting that, were you? But it's true, my initial idea to scratch this itch I had was to just remake the game I'd already poured so much time into and that had released just the year before. I went as far as remaking part of the menu and some intro animations, but it didn't take very long for me to slow down and realize that working on this remake wasn't satisfying to me at all. I was bored of working on the same thing for so many years, and I knew if this hypothetical redemption project was to ever see the light of day, then it would need to be something fresh. So I got to thinking, and then an idea struck me. To try to generate some hype back when I was working on the remake to Retaking the Airship, I had started to take some time to make some much smaller Henry fangames to keep the fans tided over until the remake was done. The first of these was Breaking the Lock, a project featuring just 3 choices and one that I made in under 24 hours from the ground up. The second of these, however, was planned to be a couple of option screens longer and would play into the spoofy nature of what my channel used to be, Blartfan Explains. This, my friends, is where Defending the Mall enters the picture. Initially, I had no idea how to expand something intended just to be a small joke game, but a couple of days after I had started toying with the idea of expanding Defending the Mall, my school had us take some kind of standardized tests. I don't remember specifically what it was for. But what I do remember is that I had a piece of blank writing paper I ended up not using for anything, so, not having access to my phone for the next hour or so, I decided to sit down and start sketching out what Defending the Mall could potentially look like. And while I unfortunately do not have this drawing anymore, as all the scratch paper was taken up at the end of the testing period, I do have this recreation of it that I made inside of Scratch almost immediately after. It's honestly kind of shocking to me how true the game ended up holding to this initial concept image. So, after this stroke of creative energy had hit me, I decided to go full steam ahead with development on Defending the Mall. After announcing the change of plans, I went back through the official Henry Stickmin collection and really tried to study the game's art style and improve my ability to recreate it. The first way I ended up testing myself was by drawing the supply closet Henry starts the game in. I had a reference image to show me what kind of thing should be in a place like this, but I had to stylize and draw everything myself. I remember slowly working on this room over the span of 3 days on my Chromebook at school, and immediately feeling better about where the project was heading once I finished it. Now that I had grown my confidence in imitating the official game's art style, I began work on creating all of the characters, the systems for the menu and fail screen, and even animated the first couple of fails. One idea I had at the time that kept me motivated during this period was the idea of simply rejecting any forms of continuity. Something I saw a lot of fan games doing around this time was trying to explore more of each faction that was from the official games, but if I'm being completely honest, I personally found this idea to be boring for my project. Retaking the airship was a continuation of the Top Hat Civil Warfare ending of completing the mission, and the reason it was my only Henry fan project actually involving Henry up until that point was because I felt like it was the only place where a fan project really needed to exist to provide some extra closure. But with Defending the Mall being a spoof of Mall Cop at heart, I just really didn't feel like trying to awkwardly insert it into the official game's timeline to try to generate some more hype. So I simply was just going with the idea that the game would not be canon to anything, be it official or not. But as time went on and my junior year of high school continued to get busier and busier, the idea gradually started to seem less novel, and by the time I was done with my junior year of high school, having announced the game near the start of the school year mind you, I only had 2 finished fails to even show for myself. I started fearing that I was working on yet another inevitable disappointment, and that only served to tank my motivation further. But obviously, something happened to break me out of this cycle. And that something came in the form of the 2024 Stickman Direct, generously hosted by Strobe Interactive. I was made aware that anybody could apply and have their fan project get into the Direct, so long as the quality of said project was up to a decent standard. But if you got accepted, you had to animate a trailer for your game within the months leading up to the Direct. And obviously, that meant actually showing off what you had been working on, of which I had very little to show. So I sat down and started thinking about what Defending the Mall really meant to me before I applied. I had recently rewatched Rocky Balboa, or as I call it, Rocky 6, and the scene where Rocky talks about having the urge to quote-unquote get the stuff out of the basement really hit home for me. I still had a strong desire to do that, I just didn't know the best way to go about doing it. So I began reviewing what I'd actually finished with the game so far, compared my design philosophy then to how I thought as a creative in the present, and I realized that my old design philosophy had been the source of my demotivation. I still didn't want the game to necessarily tie back into something like the Top Hat clan again, but I sure as heck didn't want to run away from anything resembling a story at all. And making stories is honestly the soul of my creative process, so I started thinking, what if I tried to use Defending the Mall to tell a more unique story? I started thinking about humanizing a lot of the main cast beyond just giving them each one joke or shtick, be them heroes or villains. I started thinking of ways to give Henry more of a backstory, and most importantly, I decided to set the game in an alternate timeline to the official Henry Stickmin games. And as I'm sure anyone who's 100% of the game knows, there's certainly more lore to the game than that, but I can go back and talk about secret stuff later. Anyway, with my story ready to go, I animated the first trailer and then picked back up work on the game. I actually finished the trailer in late June and was just waiting to post it until August alongside the premiere of the Stickman Direct on August 7th, which is the anniversary of the official collection of games. That day came soon enough, and let me just take a minute to talk about what it was like. I was gathered in a gigantic Discord call with tons of other fangame developers watching the Direct premiere, and it was electrifying to just have everyone giving support to each other, fangame developer to fangame developer. So I would like to thank those at Strobe Interactive, particularly Gasgrass, for putting the event together and giving not only myself but other smaller creators a chance to be seen by a larger audience. And as I'm sure a lot of you know, boy did that trailer of mine find a big one. I remember posting the trailer to my YouTube, still in its Blart fan era back then, and watching the trailer maybe get a couple hundred views by the end of the first day. It was cool, I was super grateful for it, but given how Henry Stickmin content just isn't as popular as it was back in, say, 2020, I figured it would most likely cap at a couple hundred more absolute maximum. So let me just say, it was a shocking but very welcome surprise to check YouTube Studio the following morning in class to see that my trailer was now sitting at a couple of thousand views. Up until this point, a couple of my videos that used to be up on the channel had gotten a similar level of attention, but it always took several months to get there. And this had just happened overnight. And thankfully, it didn't just stop there. I would check in on YouTube Studio maybe once every hour and see the view count climb by yet another 1,000, then another 2,000, and it just kept growing at a steady rate. It did finally slow down right at around 100,000 views, which is a number that I still cannot believe I'm saying out loud. This was easily one of my favorite periods during development because it was just so magical to me. I had never had an influx of so many strangers coming to watch something that I created, and I was left hundreds of comments I had never had an influx of so many strangers coming to watch something that I created, and I was left hundreds of comments complimenting the visuals, theorizing about the story, or just expressing their excitement for the game. While I do wish that the game's final trailer had been able to hit some of the same highs, I'm honestly content with where the viewership on both of these stands today. At the end of the day, I had thousands of people watch both trailers and dozens of comments from people expressing their excitement for something that I was making. That's not something a lot of people get to experience, and I wanted to make sure that I did not get all of the support and let it go to waste. I also felt like I had a sense of responsibility, like I needed to give the Henry Stickmin Fangame community a big win since a lot of fan projects get cancelled, to the point of most outsiders' view of fangames being nothing more than a cancellation waiting to happen. So, now armed with this feeling of purpose, not just to deliver for myself, but also for the community at large, I started working like crazy on the game again. I kept a consistent workflow, took minimal breaks from development only when life got in the way, and thankfully never experienced any burnout from my creation. I just loved working on it so much and pouring myself into the project. I know sometimes people can look at their projects as work, but for me, defending them all was honestly more fun than even sitting down to play certain video games. So after a 14-month period of active development, from August of 2024 to October of 2025, I was really working hard, and I put out some more videos on the final trailer, and ultimately released the game. I knew I wanted to start writing the script for this video after I had seen fan reactions to defending them all, and I'm just happy that I can say I delivered on every front I was hoping to deliver on. Defending them all isn't a perfect fan game by any means, but the community has had a great reaction to it, the people on YouTube have liked it, and I myself can finally say that I feel like I got the redemption that I had been trying to achieve for years. With the development timeline and release out of the way, I would now like to talk about the game itself and my thought process behind everything. I knew as far back as 2023 that I wanted the first option screen in the game to set the tone and leave direct choice in the player's hands. The only path to failure of this option is trying to run away from the conflict, showing that Henry has to face it head on. I also made sure to make the remaining two options, rush and security, as clear as possible because I feel like parts of the original Henry Stickmin games don't do the best job at that sometimes. Like in infiltrating the airship, for example, there's both a good and bad example of how to have a story choice occur. At the end of the path where Henry chases down Reginald directly, the player is given a direct choice: backstab the government and become leader of the Top Hat clan, or finish the job and get Henry's name cleared. This option screen is effective, and its relevance in completing the mission feels earned. On the other hand, you have Pure-Blooded Thief, a path that sees Henry break off from the government and instead rob the clan and make it out alone. If this was a direct choice the player made, then it would be fine, but instead the game makes it for the player after they've clicked a seemingly unrelated option. This plot point is relevant for several paths in completing the mission, but I never felt the impact of it because I, as the player, did not make the choice to go rogue. So with defending them all, I wanted every main story choice to be as transparent as possible so the player could better feel the gravity of their actions. Some other option screens I put a lot of thought into were the ones with the twists on the running gag from the official games, the Super Mario RPG mini option screen, and the confrontation with Jerome and Alice. With the first of these, I knew I wanted to bring back a couple of running jokes from the official games, but hitting the same punchlines people were already familiar with just sounded boring. So I thought to myself, hey, this is an alternate timeline, let's shake things up a bit. This time around, instead of Henry doing his titular distraction dance, he does the Kazatsky kick from Team Fortress 2. I did this not just because I wanted to keep the tradition of referencing Team Fortress 2 in these games alive, but also because the distraction dance is something Henry only ever does with Ellie after he meets her in Flame the Complex. And I don't know about you, but I don't exactly see her anywhere around the mall. I used some similar subversions of expectations with the teleporter and mood swinger. Henry normally is either nervous or just outright frustrated when he uses the teleporter in the official games, but this time around, I had him confidently wielding it like it was his signature weapon. I also knew this face would make for great advertising material, so that was a plus. And lastly, the mood swinger is a Gadget Gabe item, which isn't abnormal for Henry to use. What is different here is that if you read the note closely, you'll actually see that he's using a device that is not approved, which was never done in the official games to my recollection. The Super Mario RPG option screen is probably one of my favorites from the entire game, and it was a blast to make. I'm a sucker for the different Mario RPGs, and I knew that I wanted to reference one game from each series here. You've got the magic window from Bowser's Inside Story and the Real Cop path, a Thousand Year Door reference in the Lonnie Low hero path, so by process of elimination, I knew Super Mario RPG was next. I actually had one of my friends and eventual playtesters, Boxer Major, specifically request for an option screen to change up the feel of the game at some point, similar to the Earthbound reference in Infiltrating the Airship. And thankfully, I actually already had a little bit of experience making pixel art in Game Maker Studio. So I spent about 2 weeks working, studied some sprite art from the original version of Super Mario RPG, and ultimately came out with something that I'm pretty proud of. I've seen a couple of people think that I got somebody else to do the pixel art for me, so I just wanted to clarify that that was all me. The last specific option screen I wanted to talk about was the one with Jerome and Alice, where you have the choice to either let them go and hope they'll turn their lives around, or force them to stay put. Now, if I'm being completely honest, if there is one cutscene in the game I wish I had condensed a little bit, it is the one between the two siblings right before this. I don't think it's a badly written scene necessarily, I just think it's one of those emotional release scenes you get in a movie after having watched it for a while. Its placement makes a little more sense if you've watched the second trailer before playing the game, but it's still a very real possibility that somebody could boot the game up and immediately pick this path and be met with a lengthy cutscene off rip. And while Defending the Mall does have some other longer interactions, all of them occur after at least one option screen to help the pacing flow better and to ease newcomers into this new format. I wouldn't say I hate this scene, I still actually do like it and I'm incredibly grateful for the performance that my friend Ash Potatoes gave as Alice, but I would definitely make a few tweaks if I could do it all over again. Regardless, this scene still does accomplish its goal. It humanizes some of the villains. You aren't necessarily supposed to root for them, but you can understand their motivations better. And this confrontation also harkens back to Henry's character in this game, with him having turned away from crime to pursue something better. So while I don't necessarily think one path here is better than the other, I do think it's cool how Henry gets to talk about his personal experience and try to encourage the siblings that they can have a better life too if the player chooses to let them go. This is probably the first example most people would think of, but some other ones that I think turned out well enough are the Rail Cop Paths epilogue, the Invincible Paths epilogue, and Henry's visit to Jenny following every ending in the game. Before the last option screen in the Rail Cop path takes place, there's a shootout in the security office, which injures Rupert and Carl and flat out kills Jerome, Alice, and the two cops. I know this is still a relatively cartoony game at the end of the day, but I knew that I wanted to have the epilogue to this path humanize these cops and make the player realize that they were real people too. Heck, one of the cops that died here, Howard Standstill, has been serving on the police force for decades and was on the verge of retiring. And there's subtle tragedy with Jerome and Alice too, because they would have died right after having their argument, having never gotten to make amends. Cutting to another path, I knew that I wanted to show the aftermath of the mall incident from the villain's point of view, and putting them in the very cell that Henry was in during escaping the prison seemed like a fun way to do that. This interaction between Vec and Carl actually changes a little bit depending on if the player let Jerome and Alice go or not. If Henry let them go, Carl vents his frustration about it, with Vec actually showing a bit of remorse since he basically dragged the siblings into the mall raid, which is something Alice clearly showed she was not fully on board with. And if they still end up getting arrested, Vec still asks Carl about them to see if they're okay and brushes it off as if he doesn't care that much. It's not a lot, but with these two characters being the most villainous in the game and seemingly loving what they do a lot, I knew they realistically would not open up about themselves a ton. And finally, we get Henry's apology to Jenny. I knew I wanted this cutscene to further establish the bond between Chief Rook and Henry that gets displayed in the Rail Cop path, and I think this scene combined with his appearance in the game's final trailer really helps sell his fatherly role to Henry. Another thing I like about how this epilogue turned out is the letter system. The letter Henry reads here changes depending on which ending you got before this cutscene, and in the case of the Invincible path, changes depending on whatever you do with the siblings. I thought about maybe going more in-depth with the idea by including a few more cutscenes, but given that there's already 2 epilogues after every ending, I figured that would just be redundant. Moving on to the talk with Jenny herself, I really don't have anything I would change here. I left a quick hint at what was going on in Henry's head in the game's intro to clue in those who hadn't seen the trailers, and I allowed this subplot to have its own space instead of cramming it into every path in the game. Watching the trailers before playing the game certainly helps this scene leave more of an impact, but I never wanted trailer viewership to be necessary to understanding this part of the game. I think one of my favorite shots I animated in Defending the Mall has to be Jenny running up to hug Henry. You can tell she's still upset with him before he starts talking, but by the time he's done, she's more than ready to make amends. She's missed him and is proud that he's turned his life around, and I think it's wholesome. I do suppose there is one more scene in particular I would like to talk about, and that's the one you unlock after getting all the collectibles. I knew early on in development that I wanted the collectibles system to be more than just an achievement, because sending players on a fetch quest without much of a reward just never sounded that appealing to me. I also didn't have anywhere else to put this cutscene into the game without hurting its flow, so I figured something as lore heavy as this should serve as a really cool reward for the most dedicated of players. Similar to the cutscene with Jenny, a player wouldn't have to see the trailers to understand this cutscene, but its impact would still be strengthened by doing so. While I am generally fine with how this scene turned out, especially with the Chaos Crusaders design, I will admit that I did cut a few corners here and I could have hammed up the detail a lot. A part of me didn't want to set a concrete design for this building yet though, since that would just be locking myself into a design that would eventually need far more planning and time to create. When I was developing Defending the Mall, I did create a story that could be expanded upon in potential future installments, but I knew I wanted players to be able to piece together enough of a story in this one entry in case I ended up just leaving it here. So while I do think this cutscene is a bit too direct at times with the lore, it still accomplishes what it was created to do, and I'm content with it. So now I'm sure the million-dollar question on everyone's mind is, what's next for Steve Chrome? I've already been asked several times if I plan on making a sequel to Defending the Mall, and the answer to that is... it's complicated. Look, it's a complex topic for me, and I really feel like it warrants its own explanation in its own video, since I have a lot to say about it, and this video is already getting long enough as is. What I will say for now is that you can expect this channel's focus to remain on game development and my own personal projects. Before we wrap up discussion of Defending the Mall itself, I thought it would be fun to talk about some scrap content and general interesting things from development. Having a game design doc to better plan out the game's structure and fails generally helped development run smoother and by proximity led to less scrap content, but there were some ideas I had written down for a good amount of time that just didn't make it into the game. The first of these was themed option screens. The general gist of these was that every option would be an iteration of the same thing, and the best example I have in mind of this was a portal option screen. This option screen would have featured a swing portal from Geometry Dash, one of the multiversal portals from Across the Spider-Verse with Miguel popping out of it, and the portal gun from Portal 2, which did actually make it into the game in a much more fitting option screen. My initial idea was to put one of these kinds of option screens in every path, but given that there's only a couple of option screens per path, that just seemed like a waste in my opinion. Another goal with development for me was to only directly reference games or media I had experience with, at least when it came to option screens. So, for this reason, I decided against making any fails that related to Lethal Company and Dark Souls. I own both of these games and I've actually gotten around to playing more Lethal Company in recent times, but even if I did have more experience with it back then, I'm just not sure what I would have done that wouldn't have just been throwing a monster into the game and it killing Henry. Another cut fail idea I had was putting Henry in the Wii Sports Resort dueling getup and having him and Drone duke it out in the first option screen with the siblings. This ended up getting replaced by the flash fail because I was just feeling a bit lazy that day and realized that I really just didn't want to animate a fight scene that would require me to redraw the beanie store more times than I already had. There is one more option screen in the game I kinda wish I had changed, and that's the ball pit fail. Pit Bonnie and everything to do with Into the Pit are definitely iconic bits from the FNAF franchise, but I personally wasn't a huge fan of the game and wish I had instead done something related to Ultimate Custom Night, since I became the 15th person in the world to beat 50/20 mode on mobile during the game's development. Yeah, feel free to go and check the footage out of that by the way, it's on my side channel. As for some general development quirks, I do have a couple of funny stories. I'd say that for like the first half of development, this game was done on my Chromebook during the shocking amount of free time that I had in my hands in my senior year of high school during class. I knew that the only thing keeping the project loading properly was a small file size, so I specifically added next to no audio the entire time I was working on the game during this period. I still had the game's lip sync engine in place for everything, which was easy to tweak once I recorded all the voice lines, thankfully. But it's kind of incredible how just focusing on the animation of the game until most of it was done helped development go smoother. After this, I got a better laptop for college and was able to move to Turbo Warp, which is what I would recommend any fellow Fangame devs over on Scratch do. From there, I had to actually make sure the game functioned as intended with the map, fail screen, bio and achievement systems, and so on. I caught a couple of bugs during this stage that I thought would be fun to leave in for speedrunning purposes. Those being the game's menu options not disappearing if a player selected an option within a 1 out of 30 frame window, and the player being able to click the play button and skip intro button immediately afterwards to get some funny results. The first of these could have been interesting, as it would have allowed the player to access the map after clicking an option, but I got rid of it because I triggered it by accident far too many times in development, and I just knew it would be a nuisance for general players. The second of these, however, was actually a quirk present in the official Henry games and is used for speedrunning there, but the results in defending them all are just a bit more chaotic. After all of this came what I can only describe as the pettiest stage of development between August and October of this year. I had all of the audio recorded and all the visuals done, but I knew I could optimize the game's file size by converting any WAV files to MP3. But as I was doing this process, I realized that for certain sound effects, the file size was actually increasing whenever I went back and changed them. This was because I was converting certain stereo files to mono, which jacks up the file size considerably. I came across this by accident, but quickly realized that I had the chance to obliterate the game's file size with this method. So I exported every sound effect in the game that wasn't stereo, batch converted them to stereo MP3 in Audacity, manually redid the sounds that had a problem with that, and watched as the file size fell from a mighty 100 megabytes to almost 50. I was also able to optimize some on the visual end by getting rid of parts of the more complex backgrounds in the game that would never go seen by a normal player, which led to some pretty funny results like this one. If this is where the petty cycle had ended, it really wouldn't have been that big of a deal, but as I'm sure anyone who's worked in Scratch before knows, there's just one tiny problem with Scratch games. They're laggy to a comical degree. This is the case with vector art, which is what I use to create all the game's visuals. You can convert frames to bitmap to remedy this, but that makes the graphics grainier and will increase the file size at the trade-off of a faster load time and no lagging or crashing, which I would say makes it worth it. Thankfully, I had the idea to make a separate vector and bitmap port for the game since the beginning of development, and built the game around this, but that still left me needing to manually click the convert to bitmap button a couple thousand times to convert every frame of animation to bitmap. This was especially annoying in the case of looping backgrounds because it meant that I had to reprogram these and sometimes change details of the drawings. Specifically, the one where Henry is running away from Carl was atrocious to work on and one of my least favorite things to have to go through during development. Given that the game had done well on YouTube, I knew that most people weren't really going to want to hop on Scratch and play it in that cubed aspect ratio, and I also knew that I wanted to port it to GameJolt early on, so I made the decision to make a widescreen version of the game for download. This meant that if I didn't want to just stretch the game and make it look ugly, I needed to manually change the aspects of each background, certain character animations, and so on, which was a nightmare, but would have been way worse if I had not compensated for this when making a lot of these assets during the Scratch development period. I made a bitmap version of the widescreen port as well, which I managed to get done in a single Sunday afternoon, thankfully. I actually timed how long it took me to convert all of these frames, and it took over 2 hours without breaks. There isn't a way to bulk convert frames in Scratch like there is with audio and Audacity, so this was another really boring but very necessary part of development. Most people needed to play a more optimized version of the game anyway, so I was just happy to give that to players. Developing Defending the Mall has been an absolute joy and something I've always been able to look forward to doing most days of my week. It's kinda weird not having a game to work on at this point, honestly. I know I said active development didn't kick off until August of 2024, but I still did start this game way back in September of 2023. It's taken up a space on my head for over 2 years, and if I'm being honest, I'm almost a little sad it's over. I've changed and grown a lot as a person since development began, so it's just crazy to think about it. I started this game in my junior year of high school, and between now and then, I graduated, became an adult, and started my freshman year of college. I've also learned some lessons through developing this game as well, with the most important one being to love what I'm doing. I love this game. I love it more than anything I've ever sunk my creative energy into. And while it isn't perfect, I don't hate its flaws now like I would have with my previous projects. I poured my heart into this game, and the flaws just feel human to me. I just love it through and through. If I didn't love this game, I probably wouldn't have taken the time to go back through and optimize all the audio by manually exporting every sound, converting them to stereo MP3 files, and then re-importing and programming them. I probably wouldn't have manually turned thousands of frames from vector to bitmap not once but twice, and I probably wouldn't have gone the extra mile and made the Game Jolt ports in widescreen. But I'm so happy I did all of it, and I would happily do it all over again. So to wrap this up, I just wanted to say thank you to some people. First and foremost, I would like to thank God for creating me the way that I am and giving me the life that I have. It's all led up to this, and I just couldn't be more grateful. I would also like to give a huge shout out to Ash Potatoes, who did a great job voicing Alice in the game. She's been a reliable voice actress for me to call upon for years, and this game wouldn't have been possible without her. I would also like to thank Strobe Interactive and Gasgrass for putting together the 2024 Stickman Direct and then letting me participate in it, because without the Direct, this game wouldn't have had the first trailer be like the way it was, and the game likely would have been downsized. I would also like to give a shout out to Boxer Major, Mineral Shine, Nitty Gritty Garage, Nam and Love, and especially Let's Shoot to Kill for all playtesting the game for me. They all caught some things that flew under my radar, and I'm so grateful for their service. Niam also gave me some tips when it came to optimizing the game, so I'm pretty grateful for that. I would like to give a more personal shout out to Let's Shoot to Kill as well. This guy was a constant source of support along the game's development, and was always great about letting me share little updates with him over time. He's a great guy, and I couldn't have done this without him. Moving on, I would absolutely like to thank PuffballsUnited for creating the official Henry Stickmin games. They've been an inspiration to myself and to others for quite some time now, and I'm looking forward to seeing whatever he and his buddies at Innersloth cook up next. And finally, I would like to thank the entire Henry Stickmin community at large. You guys have shown me nothing but support over these past 14 months, and I could not be more grateful. So I'm so happy to have given you all this game, and that you all have loved it as much as you have. It's honestly been a better fan reaction than I was anticipating, which is kind of insane. There is one final group of people I would like to address here though, which I've been anticipating doing in this developer commentary since last August. And that, my friends, is showing every single comment that I have gotten from people comparing my project to Attacking the Tower, saying that I would cancel my game. I proved all of you losers wrong, and I hope you can stop acting this way in comment sections because it is a plague to the Henry community. And with all of that said, I think that's everything I had to say. I hope that by proving a fangame of this scale can be made in Scratch of all things, it can inspire a future generation of fangame developers to persevere and make the fan project they've always wanted to make. I'm actually starting work on a small fangame kit to try and help this cause, which I'll make a tutorial on somewhere down the line when it's finished. As for now, if you, the viewer, want some more Henry content, you can always go look at the most recent Stickman Direct, or join my Discord server below. It's a space for fangame developers to congregate together, pitch ideas, and for people without much experience to see the process and ask questions. Thank you all so much for watching and supporting my game. It has been a blessing. Have a good one, everybody.